Mr. President, distinguished members of the Court, it is an honor to address you for the first time, and a special privilege and responsibility to do so on behalf of the Gambia. I will continue the Gambia submission by describing the clearance operation that Myanmar conducted in a second village in northern Rakhine State, known as Chutpin. You just heard from Ms. Pasipanutka about the brutal clearance operation visited upon the village of Minji. As I will explain, a remarkably similar and cruel fate befell Chutpin, a different village in a different township, more than 90 kilometers from Minji, where the Tatmadaw massacred some 400 Rohingya. As Mr. Reichler showed you yesterday, Chutpin, known in Rohingya as Shuap Parung, is a village tract in northern Ratadang Township, surrounded by rice paddies and forest. It included a Rohingya settlement, at the time inhabited by about 1,200 people, and a nearby ethnic Rakhine hamlet with an estimated population of 400. Rohingya families there were farmers and laborers, raising livestock and cultivating vegetables. Many were at home for lunch or at the mosque for prayers when the Tatmadaw began the clearance operation at around 2 p.m. on the 27th of August 2017. Accompanied by other security forces and ethnic Rakhine people, Tatmadaw soldiers emerged from the direction of the Rakhine hamlet and encircled the Rohingya village. The clearance operation in Chutpin then unfolded according to a familiar modus operandi, characterized by 5 distinctive features. First, indiscriminate killing of Rohingya civilians. The UN fact-finding mission found, quote, the security forces opened fire, shooting at villagers, including those who were fleeing, end quote. This finding is corroborated by considerable first-hand witness testimony and independent investigations by reputable organizations. Amnesty International, for example, reported that Myanmar security forces attacked the entire Rohingya population in Chutpin. In the words of one survivor, as villagers fled towards the surrounding paddy fields, the Tatmadaw fired at them, killing whoever they could. Many Rohingya, including children, were killed. A mother recalled the murder of her 2.5-year-old son, quote, the military were all around shooting. A bullet shot through my son's stomach and opened it. I saw the blood coming out of his stomach and I fainted, end quote. The infant died soon after. Another survivor, a 12-year-old girl named Fatima, described how soldiers opened fire from behind her family as they were running from their house, killing her father and her 10-year-old sister. The Tatmadaw went door to door, dragged people out, and shot them at point-blank range, or cut their throats with large knives. As a witness told Fortified Rights, the military shot people and the Rakhine were cutting heads. Some of the people were shot by the military first, and when they were lying down, the Rakhine came and cut their necks. As another survivor told the UN fact-finding mission, if people were not killed by the first gunshots, they were slaughtered with long knives to make sure they were really dead. The second pattern in Chutpin is that the men and boys were singled out and systematically executed. In the northern part of Chutpin, for example, soldiers forced a group of villagers into a school and executed the men and boys. A victim whose husband was killed recalled, I saw so many bodies in front of the school. Some had been shot, some had been cut. All of the dead bodies were bound, their hands tied with rope. There were bullets on the ground everywhere. There was so much blood. The dead bodies were like stones in a field. House after house, the Tatmadaw repeated this pattern. When soldiers entered into a woman's home, they took her husband and father-in-law into the yard and shot them there. In another, they dragged a man outside and fired repeatedly into his chest. Another survivor saw her husband and son tied up, beaten, and slaughtered as a soldier cut their throats. In a statement taken by the IIMM, a witness testified, "The militaries took my son. They brought him to the alley of a paddy field. 4 soldiers surrounded my son. He was killed in front of my own eyes. A soldier put bullets into his long gun and shot him in the temple. He died immediately." Those Rohingya who managed to reach a paddy field found no safety. The Tatmadaw apprehended them, separated the men and boys, tied their hands behind their backs, and shot them all. The third modus operandi of the Tatmadaw was to kill women, children, the elderly, and the disabled. The UN fact-finding mission determined that, quote, "a large number of women and children were victims of the attacks. Children, including infants and babies, were specifically targeted. Some were wrenched from their mothers' arms and thrown to the ground. Others were thrown into fires and burned alive." This finding is again corroborated by witness testimony and independent reports from reputable organizations. A witness, for example, testified to the IIMM how she saw the military gather hay to start a fire and threw some little children in the fire. She said, "I saw 4 or 5 of them being thrown. They were throwing them like a ball." Another survivor recalled how after the Tatmadaw had left, he found the bodies of his 2 nephews in the fields beheaded. One was 6 years old, the other was 9 years old. One woman recounted, as she was being kicked and punched, she felt her infant son ripped from her arms and saw one of the military men throw him on the ground. As soon as he hit the ground, he was shot and killed. In yet another instance, soldiers gathered a large group of women and children. They snatched the children from their mothers' laps. A witness reported, "If any mother cried out for their baby, they shot them. They killed 10 women for that." Soldiers then dragged the children and babies to a nearby burning home and threw them into the flames alive. Witness NJ is a victim from Chutpin. The court will hear directly from her next week. She has described how the military grabbed her 3-year-old son out of her arms, used a knife to stab him around the chest or stomach area, and some of his innards spilled out. The military then carried her son towards her neighbor's burning house. She recalled, "I could hear my son screaming and see him struggling and arching his back, trying to break free. I saw them throw my son into the burning house. I could no longer see my son or hear him screaming." As for the fate of the elderly and disabled people in Chutpin, one elderly woman described to the UN fact-finding mission the brutal murder of her 70-year-old brother. Quote, Soldiers used rifle butts to beat my brother on the head, and I saw his brains come out." End quote. Other witnesses confirmed that the Tatmadaw captured and killed a man named Osman, who had both physical and mental disabilities. One witness recalled that soldiers told him to stand up, but he was not able to stand up due to his condition. The military then shot him in his chest. He died immediately. In a fourth familiar hallmark of the clearance operation, the UN fact-finding mission concluded that the Tatmadaw committed sexual violence, including rape, gang rape, sexual mutilation, and sexual humiliation against women and girls in Chitpin. This finding is fully corroborated by independent investigations and survivors' testimony. Allow me to mention a few. One survivor recalled the rape and murder of the wife of a local imam. "I saw her taken from the house and raped by soldiers. After they raped her, they killed her. She was taken to the road, and one soldier cut her neck and cut her breasts off." In another instance, the Tatmadaw gang raped 4 women in the same family. They were blindfolded, dragged around the house, and beaten. After regaining consciousness, the mother found the naked bodies of her daughters lying on their backs, motionless. In the paddy field to which dozens of Rohingya fled, the Tatmadaw captured them, killed the men and boys, and raped the women. A group of 7 women was rounded up and taken into some bushes. When one woman resisted, she was shot dead. A soldier cut off one of her breasts and held it up as a warning to the others. One victim later reported, quote, "4 or 5 soldiers held me down and raped me." At the same school where the Tatmadaw slaughtered men and boys en masse, they also raped and gang raped women. As the victim told the IIMM, "Once the militaries took me inside the school, they blindfolded me with my hijab. They threw me on the floor, on my back, and did whatever they wanted. By this, I mean they raped me. More than one raped me, but I don't know how many. Maybe 2 or 3. Another recounted that when the Tatmadaw soldiers dragged her to the school, she found women screaming and crying and saw 2 women being raped and one baby of one of the victims being thrown into a fire. Others recounted being raped repeatedly, along with other women, for 3 hours. Witness NJ also testified that she was beaten and raped by 2 soldiers until she lost consciousness. This happened after she witnessed the brutal murder of her son at the hands of the Tatmadaw. Mr. President, the Tatmadaw perpetrated sexual violence against women and girls in Chitpin in a particularly vicious manner, as if the rape and gang rape were not cruel enough. Victims included children. Others were pregnant and died bleeding uncontrollably, their naked bodies covered in blood from head to toe. One victim was raped 40 days after giving birth. As her baby was crying, a soldier cut off the woman's breast and gave it to the child. Another witness, in a statement obtained by the IIMM, testified, "I have seen with my own eyes a woman 9 months pregnant being raped and killed with a knife. They cut her belly." The fifth distinctive feature of the Tatmada's clearance operation in Chutpin is the intentional destruction of the Rohingya part of the village. The UN fact-finding mission determined that Myanmar security forces used launchers to set houses on fire, including those still occupied, and forced Rohingya inside houses, which were then intentionally set alight. The mission's determinations are again supported by witness testimony and independent reports. One survivor described in a statement taken by the IIMM how the Tatmada used launchers to burn Rohingya homes. I saw 2 military soldiers positioning 2 of those big weapons with a round wheel and a tube in front. The military's fire and the bullets from those weapons were non-stop. Amnesty International, based on its own investigation, likewise reported that the soldiers, the BGP border guard police, and local vigilantes burned Rohingya houses using petrol can and matchsticks and projectiles shot from a shoulder-fired grenade launcher. A witness told Fortified Rights that the military took some dead bodies and put them in a cowshed. They piled them in the shed and then just burned them, including the shed. UNOSAT analysis of satellite imagery confirms that the total destruction of Chutpin took place in the days immediately following the clearance operation. The burn pattern is comprehensive on the Rohingya side, shown in the brown areas in the middle of the image on your screen. Meanwhile, the nearby Rakhine hamlet, shown on the top right corner of the image on your screen, remained intact. Based on its own forensic examinations and the consistent and detailed testimony of Chutpin survivor, Physicians for Human Rights concluded that, quote, the savagery inflicted on the people of Chutpin is a typical example of the widespread and systematic campaign that Myanmar authorities have waged against the Rohingya people. The UN fact-finding mission determined that the Tatmada, specifically the 33rd Light Infantry Division, led the Chutpin clearance operations, acting in concert with other security forces and ethnic Rakhine people, including the ethnic Rakhine chairperson of Chutpin. Amnesty International reached the same conclusion, reporting that, quote, the principal perpetrators of the 27 August massacre and rapes in Chutpin were soldiers from a unit of the 33rd Light Infantry Division. A witness also confirms in a statement taken by the IIMM that the perpetrators in Chutpin were Myanmar's security forces. Quote, that day, military, police were all mixed and working together, burning houses, cutting people with knives, or shooting at running people. I could see various security forces clearly and distinguish them by their uniforms. In the end, the Tatmada killed hundreds of Rohingya and brutalized hundreds more in the clearance operation at Chutpin. Independent assessments placed the death toll at between 358 and 400, including an estimate of 127 children under the age of 6. That is 1/3 of the Rohingya population in Chutpin. Survivors described seeing bodies strewn across houses, lanes, and fields. Others saw children's corpses floating in the river. An exact accounting of the death toll in Chutpin is impossible because people were shot and dismembered and everything burned. But, Mr. President, the convergence of the UN fact-finding mission's report, consistent witness testimony, independent investigations, clinical findings, and even satellite imagery admits of only one conclusion. There was an organized and coordinated attack to destroy the Rohingya in Chitpin. Mr. President, members of the court, what does Myanmar say about Chitpin? Counterterrorism. What does Myanmar say about the ruthless killing of unarmed civilians? Counterterrorism. What does Myanmar say about the Tatmadaw raping and gang raping women and girls? Counterterrorism. And what does Myanmar say about the Tatmadaw stabbing and burning children alive? Counterterrorism. That does not add up. Counterterrorism cannot explain any of the horrific acts of brutality, sexual violence, and wanton cruelty we have just reviewed. Myanmar argues that the Gambia's reliance on the evidence I have just described is somehow flawed because it, quote, ignores the context and circumstances in which the counter-terrorism operations took place. Myanmar specifically alleges that a member of ASA from Chitpin attacked the Chitpin police with homemade bombs, as if that could be an excuse for targeting everyone in the village, for massacring children and infants, and for raping women and girls. But even if such an attack did occur, the UN fact-finding mission pointed out that, quote, plans for a clearance operation in Chitpin appear to have been made prior to this incident, end quote. In an attempt to explain this so-called counter-terrorism context, Myanmar relies exclusively on three things: a military operational report, a statement from a certain Captain Mang, company commander of Infantry Regiment No. 4, who participated in the clearance operation, and statements from supposed ASA members. Yet none of these sources engages with, let alone justifies, what the Tatmadaw actually did to the Rohingya in Chitpin. To begin with, take Annex 120 to Myanmar's counter memorial. This is the military operational report of the Myanmar Defense Services that purports to describe the clearance operation at Chitpin. It dwells on alleged clashes between the military and the, quote, Bengali terrorists, which started with the military's warning shots into the air. As the so-called terrorists continue to approach, the two sides exchange fire. These terrorists, we are told, set fire to the southwesternmost part of the village and retreated. The military then, quote, carried out security actions. And there it stops. No details of what the so-called security actions in Chitpin entailed. No mention of any burnings, killings, brutality, or sexual violence. Mr. President, as with Minji, the reality in Chitpin was not clashes with terrorists. The Tatmadaw indiscriminately, deliberately, and systematically killed Rohingya men, women, and children, raped and gang-raped women in the most cruel manners, and set houses ablaze. As Professor Newton will tell you next week, nothing in modern counterinsurgency doctrine and nothing in Myanmar's own purported rules of engagement permits that. Turning to Captain Mang's statement, which Myanmar calls contemporaneous military evidence. It repeats much of the same narrative as the military operational report. A supposed defensive operation against, quote, Bengali terrorists, using, quote, proportionate and defensive force. The statement also describes Captain Mang's own orders given to his subordinates, said to be, quote, in accordance with the right to protect and the rules of engagement, including, quote, not to shoot the elderly people, women, children, those who turned back and ran away, and the Bengali civilians who are staying inside their houses. There are at the outset serious concerns as to the independence and reliability of Captain Mang's testimony. He is a serving military officer who personally participated in the clearance operation. Moreover, his statement was taken in 2017 in a Myanmar military investigation of unknown composition and procedure. These internal military processes, as Professor Darjan will explain, have been widely criticized to be systematically flawed and conducive to impunity. But even setting these difficulties aside, his statement is uncorroborated by any independent source and is flatly contradicted by the overwhelming evidence of what actually took place in Chutpin. The record shows indiscriminate shooting, including at those who were running away, the killing of infants and children, disabled and elderly people, mutilation and raping of women and girls, and houses set alight with people still inside. Mr. President, is this counterterrorism? Not according to Myanmar's own purported rules of engagement. Not according to Captain Mang, even if we take what he supposedly ordered his subordinates to do at face value. Unless, of course, the entire Rohingya population in Chutpin is treated as terrorists. Finally, Myanmar relies on statements from men it claims to be ASA members to suggest that ASA and Rohingya villagers themselves burned Chutpin. As the Gambia explained in its reply, these men are all incarcerated by Myanmar and thus under Myanmar's complete control in the Butidang prison, a penal facility notorious for engaging in torture and other forms of abuse. Indeed, the IIMM observed in its report published in May 2024 that most Rohingya detainees in Butidang prison were subjected to, quote, verbal and physical mistreatment, torture, and other inhumane acts perpetrated by prison guards, including the head of prison, sometimes resulting in death. But Myanmar answers that there is simply no evidence that these witnesses were coerced or forced into making false statements. Yet, each and every statement from Myanmar counter-memorial and rejoinder from these men recites a boilerplate disclaimer that the witness was not beaten, tortured, or assaulted by the security forces. Mr. President, one wonders whether the fact that these men all arrived at these very similar verbal formulations, unaided over several years, is a testament to their shared clarity of recollection. Or perhaps there is a more reasonable inference. Such exculpatory language has been scripted. As Mr. Reichler explained yesterday, in Croatia versus Serbia, the court refused to accord any evidentiary weight to records of interviews by Croatian police where, quote, the words used appear to be those of the police officers themselves. In this case, the court should likewise give no evidentiary weight to statements extracted in custody in a party's exclusive control, where coercion is a known risk. As the Gambia further pointed out, in each one of these statements, the individual purportedly identifies himself as, quote, Bengali. That is a delegitimizing label imposed by Myanmar and rejected by the Rohingya, including the very small number who belong to ASA, who expressly identify themselves as the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army. If anything defeats the credibility of these prisoners' statements, it is their undoubtedly coerced self-description as Bengalis. Moreover, the contention that ASA and Rohingya villagers burned their own village is contradicted by overwhelming evidence in the form of extensive witness testimony, the reports from the UN fact-finding mission, and reports from reputable NGOs, all confirming that the fires in Rohingya villages were started not by ASA or any of its alleged supporters, but by the Tatmadaw. Having failed to engage with the Gambia's evidence, Myanmar resorts to a blanket denial that the Myanmar Defense Services engaged in any indiscriminate physical and/or sexual violence in Chutpin. It does not even attempt to provide evidence negating the fact that these atrocities occurred, much less to show that they are not imbued with genocidal intent. The Gambia's account of what happened in Chutpin rests on independent, multifaceted, and convergent proof. The UN fact-finding mission's 2018 report, grounded in more than 50 witness interviews from Chutpin, is corroborated by separate investigations by Amnesty International, Physicians for Human Rights, Fortify Rights, the International State Crime Initiative, as well as more than 20 witness accounts compiled by law, 4 signed witness statements taken by the IIMM, and the affidavit of witness NJ. Myanmar somehow dismisses this body of evidence as unreliable. But as Mr. Reichler explained yesterday, the Gambia's evidence is not only credible, it is compelling, and it warrants substantial weight. Myanmar has offered nothing in response but its own military operational report, statement from its own military officer, and words ascribed to detainees in its custody in one of its most notorious torture-ridden prisons. Its attempt to refute and discredit the Gambia's evidence is cynical. Mr. President, let us consider their challenge to the Gambia's evidence in Chutpin. First, Myanmar points to 2 IIMM witness statements which it says contradict our position that sexual violence is part of the Tatmadaw's modus operandi in Chutpin. In reality, those witnesses merely note that a group of women from Chutpin were allowed by the military to proceed to Uorofara, a nearby village. The witnesses do not say that no killing or sexual violence occurred at Chutpin, only that it did not occur to those women. Their testimony does not negate the evidence from multiple credible sources regarding what happened to scores of women and girls elsewhere in the village at the hands of other soldiers. That evidence leaves no doubt that the Tatmadaw perpetrated sexual violence against Rohingya women and girls in Chutpin. Second, Myanmar asserts that because some witness statements and account summaries from Legal Action Worldwide are anonymous and in one identified case reflect inconsistencies between 2 accounts given by the same person, none of the law material should be trusted. To be clear, the Gambia does not rely on either of these 2 accounts in respect of Chutpin. But in any event, this misses the point. Anonymization and interview notes are standard protection measures in atrocity documentation, and they do not make the content false. What matters is whether different independent sources point to the same core facts, and here they do. The witness accounts provided by law for Chutpin align with the UN fact-finding mission's determinations, with the 4 witness statements taken by the IIMM, with independent organization reports, and also with medical reporting of injuries that are typical of sexual violence. Myanmar's suggestion that identify one witness as the same individual across a collated interview note and a later signed statement somehow taints the entire corpus of the Gambia's evidence on Chutpin is simply not serious. Myanmar's challenge to the Gambia's evidence picks at labels, formats, and isolated discrepancies while avoiding the substance. The totality of the evidence on Chutpin is consistent and mutually reinforcing on the essential details of the clearance operation, namely indiscriminate shooting at fleeing civilians, targeting of infants and children, sexual violence, and the burning of Rohingya homes surgically and comprehensively. None of that is diminished by pointing a microscope at isolated discrepancies in a very small number of witness accounts. The fact that Myanmar has had to go to such lengths in search of a defense speaks to the desperation of its case. The convergence across multiple sources of independent evidence points clearly, convincingly, and overwhelmingly to one conclusion. The Tatmadaw conducted an organized operation with the intent to destroy the Rohingya in Chutpin and elsewhere. Mr. President, members of the court, I thank you for your kind attention.